We know our primary functions of our respiration is going to be gas exchange. We tie this into our circulatory system because our lungs bring in the gas, which then flows into the blood, and then circulates through our heart, right? So we've got that heart circulation piece and what we do with the oxygen when we get there. Now we got to talk about how we actually get the oxygen into our bodies. So we have our respiratory system. So function is the big one, is our gas exchange. This is how we're actually getting our oxygen in and then expelling our carbon dioxide and other waste gases. We also use our respiration for vocalization because we have that air coming in and out of our vocal cords. Believe it or not, our respiration is tied into our body temperature as well as our acid-base balance too. So there are a few different things going on. We can divide respiration into internal and external. So internal respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this is happening on the cellular level. So right now, as you're sitting there listening, your cells are working in your body to exchange gases. You're not thinking about it. You don't even realize it's happening, but you're breathing in, you're bringing in fresh oxygen, you're bringing in other gases, and that is all transferring into your system. So this happens between our blood, happens between our cells, our tissue, all the organs. The lymph, extracellular fluid is carrying stuff in it as well. So this is all in that internal section of us, right? We don't see it. The external aspect of respiration is the lungs, right? So think of your lungs as coming in contact with the outside world, right? We bring in the air through our mouth, down our trachea, into our lungs, and then exhale. So that's the external piece of it. So this is the lung and the blood, right? So how we actually, that first initial entrance of oxygen, of air into our nose also has really cool cilia, right? So the reason why you have hairs in your nose is actually to block different pathogens and different organisms from flying up into your sinus cavities. So if the longer your hair, the more it filters out. That's also part of where your tract. So the lower respiratory tract then is what you think about with everything that's underneath your throat. So it's your lungs, your bronchi, your bronchioles, your alveoli. I say alveoli because it reminds me of ravioli, so it makes it easier for me to say. Some people will pronounce it differently. It's just one of those things. There's a lot of more pieces to the heart as well, but that's as basic as we're going to get. So respiration happens for us on two different levels. We have an inspiration and we have an expiration. So inspiration, I'm inhaling, I'm drawing air into my lungs. So if I take a deep, deep breath, that's my inspiration as I cough. And then that cough or that expiration, that is my contractions and that change in pressure to get the air out of my lungs. So we use our diaphragm, and our diaphragm is causing this gradient of pressure, and it's really the pressure change that is getting the air to go into your body. It's one of those physics tricks. So if you guys have had physics already, or if you take a look, do pressure gradients online, just Google search pressure gradient, and I'm sure you'll find some cool stuff about why things go in and why things go out. So it's all that pressure. Think back to those vacutainers that we showed you, and drawing up blood and not having to push anything, but the vacuum just sucks because it's a different pressure. So you have that pressure gradient that gets your inspiration, expiration. Then once the gas is inside of your lungs, how does it actually get into your blood? Well, all of the gas exchange happens in the alveoli, and it's brought on by what we call diffusion, right? So diffusion is when particles move from a high concentration to a low concentration. Ideally, they want to be in balance. They want to be equal. So in your alveoli, we breathe in all of this oxygen, and so we have a high concentration of oxygen in our lungs, and you have a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in your blood that's in the capillaries of the alveoli. So that carbon dioxide wants to get out, that oxygen wants to go in because they want to be balanced. So that's what's happening inside of the alveoli, on that cellular level to get your blood oxygenated, right? So there's that little cell membrane barrier, and the oxygen particles fly through it, and the carbon dioxide fly through it, and they switch places. Here is a video on gas exchange. Make sure when you pull up just the Google Drive version, you do go through this video. It's going to detail more enhanced of gas exchange. And then this video is going to let you see that chemical component of how that diffusion is actually working. So you can already see that there's the blood drawing right here, and then the oxygen. So that's where I'm getting that picture on the diffusion slide is from this video. So make sure again that you're watching this. It's going to explain that gas exchange, how that process happens much more simplistically so you can better understand it. All right, so we're going back to that inspiration expiration. We have a mechanical control system. So mechanics, right? I'm thinking of machines. So these are the impulses that regulate the rate of the inspiration and the expiration. This is that diaphragm is working for us here. So this is that I need to create that pressure gradient. So my diaphragm creates that for me. And then that's how I'm able to pull air in or push or expel the air out. That ties up. Chemical control is everybody, right? So this is just the mechanics. Now, there's two different types of lungs. Mammals have very nice spongy lungs, so with super, super spongy lungs. Avians, however, have rigid lungs. So the lungs maintain their shape. They still look like lungs. They're lungs, right? They still do gas exchange, except the thing is that they're rigid. So if I take it out, instead of a nice squishy sponge, it's like a pumice stone or something that's very hard. So in order to be able to get that gas exchange and that pressure gradient that we get with our lungs, with our diaphragm, they use air sacs. So they have 9 air sacs, and these muscles allow that expansion and contraction. So they bring the air in and they push the air out. And so birds, it's kind of nifty, they actually have 2 breaths for every 1 air cycle. So in the order for the air to go in to their mouth and then out their mouth, they actually need to take 2 inspirations. And we'll get into this in a little bit more detail with the next video that comes up. But you and I, we breathe in, all the air goes in our lungs, we breathe out, all the air comes out, right? That's all happening in 1 cycle. With birds, it's 2 cycles. So when we talk about birds' respiration, and one of that sensitivities in handling birds, this is why. It's because they use air sacs and they have 2 inspiration cycles. So we'll go into that. So the first inspiration cycle, and at the end we'll draw this whole thing out, and you'll also see another video and another explanation because it's an interesting concept to grasp. So we have posterior and anterior air sacs, right? So we have our lungs, we have our trachea still. The trachea is where the air is coming in. The middle part of this diagram, that's the lungs, and then we have posterior, anterior air sacs. For simplicity's sake, we're not drawing all 9, we're just drawing 2. So instead of the diaphragm, again, we're using air sacs. So the first inspiration, the air flows into the posterior air sacs. Then we have the first expiration. With the first expiration, the air then flows from the posterior air sacs into the lungs. And you can see this being traced in this diagram with the blue, right? So the blue is showing you the oxygen flowing through the air, flowing through the lungs. Gas exchange happens on the first expiration because the air is flowing from the posterior air sacs into the lungs. So at first expiration, I'm actually in the lungs of the bird. So first inspiration, I enter my body. First expiration, I enter the lungs. Now we have the second inspiration. So I need to figure out, how do I get all that air from my lungs out of my body? Well, I need to take in another breath. That second inspiration is going to get that air into my anterior air sacs. So the chest muscles are going to cause these to expand, right? So again, this is why when we're holding birds, we never put pressure on their sternum. We always put it behind near the sides and then the ribs, or not on the ribs, but the side of their wings. So whenever we would hold those chickens, right, I would always make sure you're not crushing with your fingertips. This is why, because we need to make sure that those muscles can move so they can breathe. So that second inspiration, the air goes from the lungs into my anterior air sacs. So the air rushes into that air sac. Then I've got my second expiration, and this is the very final step, right? Now this is where the air comes out of the actual trachea. So my anterior air sacs get smaller because they're going to push that air out, and then the air escapes through the trachea. So that's the second expiration. That's the second cycle. So birds take 2 breaths for every one of ours, if you want to think of it that way, because the first breath gets the air into the posterior air sacs, then they exhale, that gets it to the lungs, then they breathe in again, that gets it to the anterior air sacs, they exhale again, and that second exhalation is what is getting the air out of the actual bird's body. It's a super nifty concept. Definitely something that I don't know if many of you knew about before, but makes birds an even kind of cooler animal, which is why they're Miss Leslie's favorite. So here's again the video. It's going to show you a diagram and explain this a little bit better, a little bit more succinct. I do want you to draw this video, draw this image in your notes, and I've actually inserted, here is the video that I inserted of me attempting to draw this on the computer. So again, get this in your notes. The more you draw it, the more you see it, the more and better you'll understand it. Because, all right, so we're avian cycle is a little tricky. Here's one from the board that I drew last year. So this is the final project, or final product rather. Again, you can see the first inspiration comes through the trachea, and then you have the posterior air sacs, and then they go through that first inspiration into the lungs. Then my second inspiration goes into the anterior air sacs, and then my second expiration, they go out of the body. So that's the final picture for you. Here's a cool exam on the respiratory system with a horse. So this is going to break down all the different pieces of what a veterinarian is going to be looking for in checking the respiratory system, because with our physical exams, we know that we need to check each body system. So with the circulatory system, we do checks with that by looking at the mucous membrane colors. We do checks with that by looking at the blood pressure. We do checks with that by listening to the heart. Those are just some ways that we check the circulatory system on an exam. So here's some ways that we check a respiratory system on